Greetings everyone and welcome back to 365 Days of Prog. Today we're going to be reviewing the album The Great Bazaar by the band Subterranean Masquerade.
Hi, my name's Naomi. I'm an avid progressive rock fan, but I'm a long ways from knowing all the prog albums out there. But this year, I'm gonna give it a try. This is 365 Days of Prog.
Wow, I am just an awful mess. I feel bad, I look bad, I don't think I can really talk without coughing every few takes, so yeah, the situation is not that good. So for the sake of not restraining my vocal cords that much, here are some of my favorite bits from this album. Truthful with you all, today's episode is probably gonna come out a bit on the shorter side, and that comes from two reasons. The first one is the grounded reason. You see, today's album, it's pretty short and it's by a band that we've already covered on this channel, so I've basically said all there needs to be said about their backstory, and well, when it comes down to the album itself, it's really as mild as you can get, but not mild in a bad way, but just mild in a way that it's a good album, but there's really not a lot to elaborate upon it, and it's even not a bad album that I have a lot of strong feelings about, so it really sits comfortably in this mild place. And well, the second reason is, if you might have noticed, for the past few days now I have not been feeling good, and I've detailed it in my videos and in my video descriptions, and well, only yesterday did I finally get the confirmation that I have coronavirus for a second time this year. So just before the end, we're having to deal with this again, and hopefully it will not stall me from making this series complete. But anyway, as I said, we've already reviewed the band we're talking about today, and that's of course Subterranean Masquerade, hailing from my home country of Israel, and the last album we reviewed of theirs about 2 months ago happened to be Mountain Fever, which came out just last year in 2021. Now, just to get everyone up to speed, I'm gonna do this in a short contextual premise. So the band Subterranean Masquerade formed around 1997, but in its beginning years it basically always had a changing lineup, never really finding their own real lineup to stick along with. And in the year of 2004 they released their first EP called Temporary Psychotic State, which was pretty successful, and it was followed up in 2005 with their first studio album called Temporary Psychotic State, which also happened to be pretty well received in the progressive metal community. And after touring around with the EP and the album for a while, in 2007 the band went on a hiatus. Now at that time it probably seemed like the band has broken up, but it only took them 6 years to come back with new material in the form of yet another EP called Home in 2013, and from that point onwards the band did have a stable lineup to their name, and they moved on when releasing their second studio album with a 10-year gap since their first, and that means that in 2015 they released this album, and it also happens to be the album we're reviewing today, called The Great Bazaar. Now, one of the more interesting players, or actually vocalists, to be found on this album is actually Kjetil Nordhus, which we know from the band Green Carnation, which I remember quite fondly for his performance on Light of Day, Day of Darkness. He has some beautiful vocals and he does accentuate them on this album as well, but he doesn't do all the vocals on here. You see, Nordhus is actually only doing what you might call the soft vocals, the regular singing vocals, but when it comes to the harsh vocals or the growling, it's actually being done by Paul Core from the band November's Doom, which I personally don't know that much, and honestly listening to the way that he does his vocals, I really don't want to get to know their music, because that was one of the low points of this album. Definitely the growling, it just didn't really fit and do it for me. But yeah, as I said, this album was definitely a comeback for this band, and it also did serve its purpose. It did go back to featuring the main motifs that are well associated with a band like Subterranean Masquerade, with their Middle Eastern and also Ashkenazi Jewish influences, as well as this one having a much more symphonic and orchestral tone to it, as well as just sometimes being your average hard prog. Now, as I noted before, this album really isn't that special, and in the worst way possible. You see, this album is good, and I can see that. I've listened to it, it's fine, it's enjoyable, I go along with it quite well, but there was nothing to stand out of it that told me, you know what, this is really good. And especially when comparing it to Mountain Fever, which I gave a rating of 9 out of 10 to, this one really is nothing that special, but as I said, it's also not bad, so there's not a lot that I can point out of here that really sticks out to me, and as a whole, this album just passed by me like a fly in a breeze. But to elaborate a bit, this album does have 7 tracks to its name, and well, most of them revolve around the 5-minute length of runtime, with the last track on the album being a whopping 9 minutes. And 6 of the 7 tracks to be found on this album do actually include vocals, so guess which one I chose as my favorite? Of course, the one less traveled by. Now don't get me wrong, the songs on this album, as I said, are genuinely good. Like the opener track of Early Morning Mantra is actually pretty nice, and it incorporates both symphonic prog as well as the very unique Porcupine Tree sound together. Tour Diary is also a standout track as well, and it has some really exceeding use of violins and pianos, which I personally really like. And the last track on the album, Father and Son, is also pretty nice. I think it's the most eclectic out of them all, and also the most progressive in a way, but just because of its runtime and the fact that it changes moods and tones along its way, and I think that it's good, but as I said, nothing more than that. As I said, I chose the instrumental track from this album as my favorite, and it's called Nigen, or Nigen technically, because it's supposed to be in Hebrew, which means he played in the past. And well, this one I didn't choose because it stuck with me the most, but because this one is the most likely to stick with me if I listen to it more. And while I won't say that this one is exceeding in any different or unique way, I will have to point out the fact that it is led by the clarinet, and well, what I've learned this year is that clarinet plus prog means awesomeness, so you should probably go ahead and check this one out. But yeah, to sum this album up a bit and to sum this quite short video a bit as well, I'd have to say that this is not a special album that much, but if I had the opportunity to go and see this one being played live at a reasonable cost, I probably would go for it. But for now, let's go for something else, like reviewing this album's cover. So at first I thought to myself that I was going to say something along the lines like album like cover, but then I realized that, well, I don't think that this cover really represents this album in the same way, and I think that while the album itself is fine, the cover is less than fine. Like, I honestly don't know what the artist that made this cover was going for. Is this just a 2-cent version of the Division Bell? I really don't know, but to me this cover looks like the first draft of like a very basic concept a while before you actually reach the final goal. And I think that in order to make this cover a bit more interesting, they could have done just one thing, and that's to give the faces some facial expressions so we'd have an idea of what they might be feeling, but they're so indifferent, they lack any facial feature at all, and honestly it just takes away from everything that this cover could and might have had. So when I look at this cover, while I don't personally hate it that much, I just think that it fails the conceptual and the design test, so yeah, it's not really that good of cover. So if you've been watching this series for a while and you've heard my opinions of this album thus far, you would know what the rating I'm going to give it is. And well, it's no surprise, but this album is as basic but good basic as you can get, so I'm gonna give it a rating of 7 out of 10. But that's about it, guys. I hope that you enjoyed this video and stay tuned for tomorrow because we're gonna be listening to Yeti by Amandul II, and we're gonna be joined by a very special guest. I'm so freaking happy for it, so let's get on with it. And yeah, of course, want to thank my lovely supporters over on Patreon, so thank you so much to Clay Wan, Arist of Kings, and Lindsay Haycox. You guys are the best. Even in these times of coronavirus, I can think of you guys and know that you're motivating me to keep this thing going on. And of course, if you want to be a Patreon, you can always find the link down in the description or in my about page. But that's about it, guys. Have a wonderful day, and I'll catch you all tomorrow. Bye, guys.